let's get started. We can discuss data for days, and let's start this chat by defining data.
So at the Tucker Center, we have a motto saying, let the data tell the story. And this data can mean a million different things, but generally we view data as experiences, as stories, as narratives, and this can be expressed in numbers, words, images, texts, articles, tweets. Really any type of representation of the social world is something that we consider data. So data truly is all around us. And we view our job at the Tucker Center is to take this data and these problems that surround gender and sport and translate it into actionable solutions to the problems that we face. And so generally, we have 3 buckets of research, and the first is retaining and developing girls in physical activity. We do that through different coaching programs and coach education primarily. And then the second bucket is gender equity in sport leadership. So that's our Women in College Coaches report card is a great example of that, to try to uplift and hold stakeholders accountable for coach hiring practices. And the third bucket is the business of women's sports. And so we work with sport organizations such as Nike, the USTA, We Coach, and help them use data to make strategic decisions to create change and create safer, more inclusive, and more empowering sport environments for women and girls.
So I work with Soccer Without Borders, and we are a direct service organization, meaning that we deliver programs directly in communities to young people across 42 program sites in 3 different countries, multiple cities. So one of the most important ways we use data is to make sure that we are delivering what we say we do. So we have this phrase that we use that we would say, data helps us to know if we're doing things right and also if we're doing the right things. So all the research you just talked about, Anna, gives us this sort of backdrop of what are best practices, what does the research tell us we should be doing to sort of put young people in the best position to achieve their goals, reach their full potential. One example of that, there's extensive research that talks about the value of mentoring, and that mentoring relationships of 12 months or more have huge impacts on social emotional learning, on a sense of confidence. So rather than like reinvent the wheel and redo that research, what we can do is show that our programs align to that best practice. And then we rigorously monitor fidelity to that model. So we measure things, we measure what we're doing in terms of the activities that we have, who's participating, attendance rates, retention rates. We also measure what we call fidelity to our model. So if our model is research and evidence designed, how do we make sure that any given day, anywhere you walk in and see a Soccer Without Borders program, you're going to see these key elements. You're going to see trust-based, trauma-informed programming where mentoring relationships can be formed, for one example. So we use a couple of tools for that I'm excited to kind of get to talk more about, but we're measuring that our coaches are delivering on this program every day, everywhere. And that's sort of one side of things. I think the other side, before I pass to Preeti, is any organization should also measure that you are living your own values. So internal measurement about our own process, how we are, how we're operating. So we measure things like staff satisfaction. We measure things like the demographics of our staff. Who are we hiring? Who are we promoting? We do an extensive analysis on our compensation equity across different levels, across different locations. One of our values is equity. So how are we putting that into practice within our organization? So I would say, yeah, doing things right, doing the right things, and holding ourselves accountable to our values are the biggest ways we use data. I'll pass to you, Preeti.
We sit in an interesting place, I guess, because we're, as Upshot, an organization, a vehicle for where other organizations put their data. And so we're really privileged in that we get to see a lot. We get to see a lot of data. We get to see what's working and what isn't. We get to compare and benchmark how organizations use their data. You know, it's a great question. Like data can be as broad or as detailed as you want it to be. And we really do see the spectrum of how data works. Like at a granular level, organizations that we work with, in a really similar way to how Mary described, would be collecting participant information. So individual information, feedback data, engagement data, outcome data, really the goal being to understand, so what? We're doing something, so what? Is it working? How do we know? If it is, how can we replicate and scale? If it's not, how do we know that in real time so we can tweak and adapt? And that's really what this is about for us. It's about understanding in real time whether things are working, or importantly, if they're not working, so we can do something about it. The interesting place about where we sit as an organization is because we have all these individual data sets, we can then ladder them up. And so we get a bit more of a macro view of how things are going. So, for example, we could look at a country and we could look at what a load of sports are doing in a certain country, or we could look at a social issue and look at what work is being done in a certain place to deal with a social issue. And so the beauty of how we work with data is we have different lenses on, and we're sort of just cutting and querying the data to try and understand this so what question. I also wanted to really briefly touch upon my other hat, my football club hat, because obviously as a football club, there's lots of different kinds of data we collect, but an important part of it is player data. And there you really start to go into quite a lot of detail around the physical, emotional, biometric, what are all the things we can understand about our players, our people, our staff, our fans, in order to give us the information that we need so we can serve them better.
Thank you for taking the time to define it with your own experience and applying it. And moving on to the next question. What is data used for, and what can data be used for in your organization, in your own experience? Would you like to start, Mary?
What we just heard described, Anna's talking about sort of collecting data to create research, to identify gaps that need to be addressed, gaps that programs like ours are then trying to contribute solutions and contribute towards better outcomes. And Preeti's organization she's speaking to at the other end of that kind of theory of change, how do we measure that those outcomes are happening and sort of make recommendations for iterations? We sit in between there, which means we also use both. So we rely a lot on the research from organizations like the Tucker Center in order to make the case that what we're doing is valuable and can contribute towards addressing inequities or injustices that society wants to change, that we all want to change. So you think about one population we serve is English language learners across the United States. We work with refugee and new immigrant youth who've arrived here, may not speak English yet, and yet are placed into American schools kind of corresponding with their age and less with their English language level or education that they've completed in their home country. So there's a huge period of catch up and there's social adjustment, there's emotional adjustment, there's often trauma. And our program is able to create a holistic support network and a sense of belonging that allows for healing and learning and sort of getting acclimated so that kids can get on a path to graduate from high school and go on to reach their goals. Underpinning that, when I try to make that case to a funding partner, we rely on research. Like there's research from George Mason that says that the biggest two indicators of immigrant success in America are social capital and English language skills. It's like I can then use our youth survey data. I can use our data about our activities around language instruction, around number of hours that kids are able to practice and gain English language skills to sort of make the case that this program is contributing to those two really crucial skills. We can also use data around like English language learner graduation rates in the United States. In the states where we operate, ELLs are graduating at a rate of just 61%. That's more than 20 points lower than the American average of 84, 85%. In Soccer Without Borders, our program's regular participants graduate at a rate of 95%. So we're able to make these comparisons without doing original research all the time that sort of that would turn our program into like a lab experiment. One of our core values is process orientation. We really want to make sure that we are not disaffecting the environment that we're creating in service of, needing to prove all the time that that our impact is valuable and should be continued to be invested in. So that I just wanted to sort of draw a link between the other two speakers. I've named some other ways that we use data, but if you picture a group like Soccer Without Borders sitting between kind of the research and then the outcome, the aggregate outcomes that Preeti and her organization are seeing across countries.
Yeah, that's perfectly explained, because it's, effectively, when we look at what we're doing with the data, it's around decision making. And I really love what Mary said around we're making the case for. And just like each individual organization, like Soccer Without Borders, is making the case for their work, we are then the layer up that takes all of that and then makes the case often to government. So to give you an example, a large piece of work that we're doing in the UK is looking at sports impact on reoffending rates in prisons. And what we're basically doing is we're saying we're going to track whether prisoners that do rowing, that go to the gym, that play soccer, that do yoga, whatever that might be, over a period of time, are we seeing that if they're engaged in sport while they're in prison, they may not reoffend later. We're using that data to then make the case to government to say, invest in better sports facilities, invest in better coaches, invest in better staff that are trauma trained to be able to work with people because what we're able to prove at a macro level is this stuff works. And we know it works because here are 10 different examples of how it works. It's not just one case study. And the more we can build that out, so a really common example, and we talk about this a lot in the sector, is looking at something like the Sustainable Development Goals. We're all doing our individual piece. How can we say that sport makes a contribution to the SDGs? And are we able to aggregate that data in a way that we basically saying, before each individual organization fights for the money, can you all fund sport first? And then we can all split that between us. But what tends to happen in real life, which is a shame, it's because NGOs funding is tight and NGOs have to struggle to prove themselves. They have to prove they're better. And so they end up in this situation where they're all fighting for the same pots of money. Whereas what we're trying to say is they're all brilliant. They all do great stuff in their own way. So why don't we start to isolate where an organization like Soccer Without Borders can have really meaningful impact? Let's support them to do that, or a different NGO here, or a different sport there, blah, blah, blah. So we're very much sitting the level above.
I really appreciate what both of you said, especially Mary. I love the idea of a spectrum, kind of where we all lie in our respective roles. So I'll fill in kind of like the micro level if we see Mary as kind of like the middle meso level, like Preeti and Upshot as almost this macro level. What we see, and we have seen at the Tucker Center with our data, is that data is allowing for individuals to have accountability, to have power, and to find community. And in particular, I'll give an example of our Women in College Coaches Report Card again. When we're kind of tracking, the purpose of the report card is to document the rate of women coaches in the NCAA and really just highlight this underrepresentation of women in sport leadership. So from the individual level, we found actually that having this data and having individuals be aware of this data is really helping to shape their decisions, check their own biases, and correct those injustices and inequities that they are experiencing in the workforce, and holding decision makers accountable to correct those injustices. So without the facts and without data and without research, we can't really hold decision makers accountable, and we also can't hold ourselves to higher expectations about potentially choices we make and where we spend our money, choices we make and where we want to take a job. Like we found with the report card that coaches, for instance, are using the framework that we have in documenting the rate of women coaches and using that to drive their own decisions of, do I want to work for this organization? If they offered me a job, maybe they have one woman coach. What does that say about the environment? And is this a place where I'm going to feel welcomed and safe? So that's something I found really powerful. Something of the resource gaps that data allows us to see, what Mary and Preeti both kind of shine a light on, is also really important. And then the community building factor of data is something that we at the Tucker Center really believe in, because again, if data is stories and narratives and experiences, it fosters this sense of solidarity and consciousness raising about, if I'm a coach and I'm experiencing this bias or gender harassment or anything like that, I don't feel as alone when I kind of look and see the data and go, oh, this is a systemic problem across sports, this gender harassment that I'm facing. And there's ways and steps we can come together and try to collectively solve this problem. So I think the social process of data at the individual level is something that I find really powerful.
I know everybody kind of touched a little bit on this, but just to go a little bit deeper, how will data help us elevate the industry to a more equitable and inclusive place? Preeti, would you like to take it on?
Yeah, I think at its basis form, if we don't know where we are right now, then we don't know what we're aiming for, right? And so, for me, it's around establishing baselines. It's around saying, where are we trying to get to? Where are we now? And how are we going to get there, right? In order to do that, we need to have the data. And it's surprising, like in the UK, it's really surprising how little data we have on women in leadership roles in sport. Like that, it's something that there's a massive gap. And so when Mary was saying, as an organization, they look at their own equity, they look at their compensation, they track the demographics of the people they hire. That's not happening across the board. And so when we're looking at whether there are enough women in leadership positions, whether there are enough women at C-suite level, whether we are paying men and women the same, if we don't have the data to start with, it's impossible for us to do that. And then when you do have the data, it's really, like in the UK, it's really stark. I'll give you, I'm one of only 10 women on a Premier League board. I'm the only Asian woman on a Premier League board. When you go down to the championship, which is the next division down, it's 4% of the championship are women. Like the where we have the data, it's really bad. And so it's really important, when we're talking about equity and we're talking about elevating the industry, I think the first step is understanding how deep the problem is and really being honest about the fact that if we want to change something, then we're going to have to track this. And we're going to have to be open and accountable to ourselves. We're going to have to be transparent. We're going to have to do the work. Like there's a lot of talk at the moment around equality, diversity, and inclusion. And people feel like you hire somebody with that role and your job's done. But as organizations, we have to do the work. And so what I mean is, are you looking at how diverse your panels are when you're interviewing? Are you looking at who's shortlisting? Are you looking at accessibility when you're putting out job adverts? Like all of these things matter. All of these things count. And I'm sure you guys have all heard this before, but the age-old stat around men will apply for a job if they meet 20% of the job description and women 80. That stuff exists. And so what are we proactively doing, and how are we proactively using the data that we have to make sure that we're not putting additional barriers in place? Like that's for me a way for us to make sure that the industry gets to where it needs to get to. But in order to do that, we just need to be really honest with ourselves that we're not in a great place, and we're not going to get to a better place unless we acknowledge that we have a problem. And then my last point on this is looking at intersectionality. Like I think, we talk about women and that's wonderful, but as we know, that's just one layer. What about women of color? What about women with a disability? What about LGBTQI women? Every layer of intersectionality that we put on adds another barrier. And so how are we being allies to each other, especially those of us that are in positions where we can hire, where we are in positions of power? How are we leaving the door open and the ladder down?
Yeah, I really appreciate especially your point about intersectionality, Preeti. And I think how we kind of conceptualize the Tucker Center is that data is agency and power and allows us to advocate for ourselves and gives us the information that we need to make informed decisions and counter some of the dominant narratives in the sports industry. A Here's Proof campaign, and that's kind of documenting the attention and media attention around gender in sport and kind of counter this narrative that people just aren't interested in women's sports, so it doesn't deserve to get media attention, doesn't deserve to be on TV. But we're saying, hey, here's these amazing, huge attendance records. The England Women's Euros, sold at Wembley, and that is completely countering the narrative that, people aren't going to show up for a women's football game. And then also, I see data as, especially social justice focused data, as giving voice to people who were previously and previously overlooked in the sports spaces. So this form of knowledge and these traditional narratives and what that means is really been dominated by white men. And so how can we as researchers, especially this is kind of the process that we go through the Tucker Center, how can we help illuminate the voices and experiences of people that haven't really had a space to do that before? And how can we include those people to help them get better, more empowering, safer sport environments that fit their needs, rather than trying to fit into a model that was not really made for them in the first place? So how can we kind of rebuild and restructure that? And that really starts with data and documentation.
I love that. One thing that made me think of, Anna, is that data has the ability to kind of shatter false realities, where people think that something is real and people don't care about women's sports. And then you both present these counterexamples, but also the fact that just 4% of media coverage is even devoted to women's sports. And with that little investment, we're already getting these outcomes. Imagine if you invested more equally. I want to sort of complement what you both just said by just taking it to sort of a micro level of how also an organization can sort of turn the narrative and the subjective into more objective data, because humans have biases, right? So like I'm looking across our organization and I'm thinking, oh, this program's doing really well, there's strong attendance data, or this program's doing really well, this program's struggling, in these ways, it's underfunded, whatever these snapshots are. I have biases about those. I'm gonna one day wake up and be stressed about funding, so I'm going to be evaluating everything through that lens of whatever I'm most focused on. And like you just said, because we're a part of an industry that for a long time has been so inequitable, our lenses are shaped by that. So am I looking with the sharpest racial equity lens? Am I looking with the sharpest gender equity lens? So what data can do on a granular, micro, day-to-day level is give us a neutral friend to help us look holistically at what is actually happening and identify where are there trends. There are 3 kind of tools that we've developed to do this. We use what we call an altitude framework, or sort of zooming in and zooming out. So the coaches exist at like the 3-foot level. They're there, their feet are literally on the ground. And we use a tool called the family framework to ask coaches to reflect every day on whether they actually did all the little things that create an inclusive and welcoming environment. Everything from opening and closing circles to shout outs to safeguarding to warm-up routines to skill building. There's 48 different sort of checkpoints, and you want them to constantly measure themselves against that. So their biases for what they're good at or what they're most confident in, they can sort of identify their weaknesses and work on those. And at an aggregate level, if I have data from 50 different coaches' family frameworks, I can see, hey, as an organization, we are not supporting our coaches enough in this area, and then we can address that. You go up one sort of altitude to a site level, like looking at an entire school site and what's happening there. We have a tool for that measures 360 degrees, everything from safeguarding policies to activity implementation to training of coaches to partnership management, all of those things. And again, you can look at a granular level, and that coach, that person running that site can say, hey, how is this going, the beginning and end of the season? But then at an aggregate level, you can look across all 41 sites and see, where do we need to invest? And then again, up the next altitude, we do it at a city or regional level. So I just want to encourage us that, like, at the highest level, we can make cases from data. And also on a day-to-day level, we need this neutral friend to help us run our organizations better so that we are doing what we say we're doing.
For the final question, it up to the panel. It's kind of an individual question for everybody. So Preeti, first with you. As the founder of an organization helping other organizations capture and leverage their data, what does your day-to-day look like working with this data?
It's really interesting. I think if you told me, I don't know, 10 years ago that I was going to work with data, I don't know if I would have been excited by that. Like, I happen to fall into this. And what I love about my job is how varied it is. Like, every day is so different. And so one day, I'm working with a really, a men's mental health project that a guy is running in his backyard. In a small village in the UK. And the next day, I'm doing a workshop for a big international sports federation. And the third day, I'm talking to a government about, how we can change policy. And I think that's my favorite part of it is because these organizations are so varied, and we work with just over 1,000 organizations. They're so different from each other. They're all making incredible impact on the ground. There is something incredibly satisfying about playing a very small role in supporting them to do that. And so one of the things that I spend a lot of my time doing is building capacity within these organizations, because the idea is data is currency. It's not going anywhere. And so we need more and more practitioners to be comfortable with data, comfortable using it, empower them to be able to understand what it means. Because for smaller organizations, you can't, and I saw questions somewhere around consultants. Not everybody can afford to go get a consultant to come in and do this stuff, or not everybody can partner with an academic to come in and evaluate their program. So the more we can build a little bit of capacity and knowledge and skills within every single sport organization, the better we're all going to use our data. And I think that's my favorite part, is entering a room, having a whole load of people roll their eyes because I'm here to talk about data. And at the end, people saying, this is really interesting, and I think I really like it. And there's something really amazing about that.
I think as a college student, when people say data, I'm automatically like, oh my gosh, no, that's so scary. It's graphs, charts, everything like that. But now experience, it's like less intimidating. And I think that's the goal of Women in Soccer as well, to be like, this is the door, you can go through it. We're going to hold your hand. We're a team here. So I appreciate you sharing that. Now, Anna, as a researcher, what excites you most about your research and collection process? And is it the capturing process or the development of the implementation of tools like the coaching scoreboard?
Yeah, I love this question, and I really relate a lot to what Preeti said earlier also, and kind of, Sophia, what you were saying about data can be really scary, and a lot of people think numbers, computers, stats. I'm really bad at math, so you can take that from me that I'm a PhD student and I'm not kind of like in the weeds of numbers all the time, and that's kind of a limited view, I think, a lot of times of data, because like I said earlier, data is stories and experiences, and that's probably my favorite part, is diving into understanding people's experiences, using theory, using what we know and prior knowledge, and challenging that. And my favorite part really is kind of the process of taking people's voices and experiences and knowledge and turning that into programming that they can then improve their experiences in sport. So for example, we have coming out this week actually is our Coaching Her program, which is a free online evidence-informed coach education program designed to upskill coaches on how to best support girls in sport. And this process is really built through listening to the experiences of athletes in sport, seeing what doesn't work for them, understanding how coach biases and stereotypes around gender and this gendered lens could be harming athletes across the gender spectrum. And so that process of kind of building off of these words and discourses that they're saying and taking that data, and then, in academia, there's a big stereotype and kind of, conception that we create this data and we create this research and we publish articles and they kind of stay within this ivory tower and they don't really go anywhere. And the only people they talk to are other academics. And that's something that we really actively try to challenge at the Tucker Center, is making this data publicly accessible, free, in a way that not only academics can understand, and using it to empower others. And so this Coaching Her program is a great example of that, and kind of using data to actually make a difference in people's lives. And that's what energizes me every day, is kind of knowing that, you know, the schoolwork that I'm doing or this research as a student, Sophia, I understand too, kind of, you can kind of get into the weeds of like, why am I reading this, or why am I doing this, and what does this actually help? And so trying to think of that next step of, this isn't just a publication, or this isn't just a paper, is going to help build something that will make someone's life better.
Thank you. Yeah, and as a student, I could definitely relate. And one of the things one of my mentors said is, the data's on the paper, but tell the story. What is the data telling us? But not least, as an executive director of a direct services organizations, when you think of your ideal data analyst and what their passions and or responsibilities would be in your organization, what comes to mind? Is that a role in analyzing data, capturing, collecting, monitoring, anything else?
Yeah, I think the most clear role that, if you want to be a data analyst and come into a direct service organization, is around monitoring, evaluation, and learning. That's the most sort of like aligned, obvious place that there would be a fit. And that's everything from monitoring program activities and who we serve, and aligning that with our theory of change into how do we evaluate our work, maybe bringing in or partnering with academic institutions to do a more rigorous evaluation. But I think the other part of that question that has to do with like, what is the type of person that would be best suited to do that kind of work at a direct service organization? And I think what is essential is that at the aggregate level, the individual humanity of each person is sort of lost. You become a statistic among many statistics. And at our level, it can't be. And shouldn't be. I don't think it should be at any level, but definitely at a direct service level, you know, each of these statistics is a person with a story in the context of a community with a story. And when you try to sort of apply, I studied sociology. When you try to apply a sort of research hypothesis to a program, it can be very dehumanizing. Like, even just to collect attendance data, literally, for a coach, for a person, is incredibly challenging. You're trying to do, I think there's probably 1,000 things that the world tells coaches they need to be doing every day, that research says is best practice, and you should be doing this and this and this. Sheer numbers, you can't do it all in a single session, in a single day, and make sure that you're, you know, not just doing the thing, but also collecting data about the thing you just did. So, as Preeti mentioned, you know, it's a resource. There's definitely a resource scarcity that makes collecting data at our level really challenging. And also, so I think somebody who wants to sort of embed themselves into a direct service organization focused on data, monitoring, evaluation, learning, needs to carry with them a sense of empathy and willingness and motivation to be the bridge between program practitioners who have very challenging daily realities, that they're going to do things imperfectly every day. I coached for a number of years. My plan went out, you know, you have a plan, and then it just happens. And the day just happens. And so somebody who maybe has come from a programming lens, I think if you have been a coach and can do data, that is an incredible asset in somebody in monitoring, evaluation, and learning, who's actually been out on the field and knows what it's like to be in the shoes of the coaches, you know, when you're asking them to collect this kind of data.